The storm found me before the road did. I had been riding since midday through the pine corridors of the Ashenmore border, my cloak soaked through, my side burning where a scout's blade had found the gap between my riding leathers 3 hours east of here. The wound was not mortal. I had taken worse and kept a saddle, but it was deep enough that every stride of my horse reminded me of it, a pulling, liquid insistence that I was not as invincible as my counsel believed. My crown was wrapped in oilcloth in my saddle-bag. My colors were covered. I was, to any eye that might catch me in the dark, a traveling ironworker named Wren, out of the eastern roads, caught in whether he should have outrun. This was how I had ridden for 6 years. Not always wounded, not always in the rain, but always alone, always unnamed, always moving through the border territories with my crown packed away and a false name on my tongue, because the thing I was searching for could not be found by a king. I had learned that in the first year. I had ridden into 3 packs in my full regalia, with my council's maps and my grandfather's records spread across the table, and every elder had bowed and told me what I wanted to hear. Yes, there had been a woman of the Veyrath line here, yes, the Bloodline was here once, and then invariably, gently, but she is gone now, my king. She passed, she moved on. The line died with her mother, I am sorry. A king is told what a king wants to hear. A traveling ironworker is told the truth or nothing, and both are more useful than comfortable lies. So I rode as Wren. I had done it so long that the name sat easily in my mouth, and my wolf, who in 6 years of searching had said almost nothing, had gone gray and quiet inside me in a way that frightened my packmaster, but that I would not discuss. My wolf did not object to the false name. He had stopped objecting to most things. He lay inside my chest like something exhausted, breathing but not awake, present but without urgency, as though he too had learned that the searching was endless and had decided to simply wait. He had been still since the night of my 28th year, when my grandfather died. My grandfather had ruled Varenhold for 40 years before me, and in his last hours he pressed an iron disc into my palm, old iron, dark with age, smaller than my fist, with a seal worked into one face that I did not recognize. Not the Varenhold crest, something older. He told me that every Varenhold king before him had carried it, and none had found what it was for. He told me the disc would know. He told me I would understand when the time came. And then he died, and I became king, and the disc sat at the bottom of my saddlebag for 3 years while I learned what ruling was. And then on the 4th year I opened my grandfather's record books and found a single page in his hand that said, "The Veyrath line. Find her. The seal will know her blood." That was all, no map, no description. No name. The Veyrath bloodline. I gave the name to every archivist and elder in Varenhold and received polite uncertainty in return. An ancient line. Very old. Said to carry something in the blood, the records were vague, damaged by time, something that completed the bond mark in gold rather than the usual silver gray. Every bond mark in every pack I had ever seen was silver gray, the color of moonlight on still water, beautiful and correct. The gold that the old records described was something I had no frame for. Something that had not been seen in 400 years, the last archivist told me carefully, because the Veyrath line had scattered and thinned, and very likely ended. Very likely was not the same as certainly. So I rode. That night in the storm on the Ashenmore road, my horse slowed without my asking him to. He had better sense than I did in bad weather, and he had caught something, a scent, a light, a change in the wind that made him turn his head to the left, toward the dark tree line. I looked where he looked and saw it. A light. A single warm square of it, low and steady through the rain, far enough from the road that I would have missed it if my horse had not decided to stop. A cottage, stone-built old, with a steep roof and herb bundles hanging under the eaves so thick they swayed in the wind like curtains. A fire burning inside. One window lit. I was bleeding and cold and 6 years tired. I turned my horse toward the light. I did not knock. I had raised my hand to knock, my knuckles against the old wooden door, 3 inches from the wood, when the door opened from inside. She did not look startled. That was the first thing I noticed. She opened the door and looked at me the way a person looks at something they expected, not something that surprised them, calmly taking inventory, my soaked cloak, my horse steaming behind me in the rain, the way I was holding my left side. Her eyes moved across all of it without haste, and then she stepped back from the doorway. "Bring him in out of the rain first," she said, "and then come back for yourself." She meant my horse. She had already turned toward the back of the cottage, moving to open the small stable door set into the rear wall. and I stood in her doorway for a moment with rain on my face, and understood that she was not asking my permission. I led my horse in. She gave him water and a handful of dried oats and latched the stable door without ceremony. Then she came back around to where I stood, still in the doorway, and looked at my left side. "Sit down," she said. "I am fine," I said. She looked at me the way, I would later learn, she looked at every wounded thing that lied to her about its own condition. Patient, unconvinced, already moving toward her herb shelves. "Sit down," she said again, "the chair by the fire." I sat. Her name was Mara. I learned it because it was carved into the lintel above her door, not decoratively, just practically, the way a person carves their name into something they have owned long enough that it has become part of them. I did not ask it. She did not offer it. But she moved through the cottage with the ease of a woman entirely at home in herself, and when she set a clay pot on the fire and began working through her herb bundles with quick, certain hands, I watched her and thought that she was the most unhurried person I had ever seen. Not slow, unhurried. There was a difference. She did not waste motion. She did not speak to fill silence. She did not look at me with the particular alertness that people tended to develop around strangers, the constant reassessment of whether the stranger was dangerous. She looked at me when she looked at me at all, the way she looked at my horse, as a wounded thing that needed tending and nothing more alarming than that. "Your name," she said, cutting a length of linen into strips without looking up. "Wren," I said. It came out easily, as it always did. She nodded. "Where from?" "East the iron roads." "And the wound?" "A disagreement on the road." She looked up at that, not with suspicion, just with a brief level assessment. "A blade," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." She nodded again and came to kneel beside the chair. She pulled my cloak back from my left side with hands that were careful and impersonal, the hands of someone who had done this before, and when she saw the cut she made a small sound that was neither alarm nor approval, just acknowledgement, the way a craftsperson sounds when they see the true extent of the work. "It's deep," she said. "It needs closing. I'll need you to hold still." "I will hold still," I said. "People always say that," she said, and reached for her needle and thread. She was right that people always say it, and wrong to assume I would not. I had been stitched in the field by my packmaster more times than I could count, and I knew how to be still. I sat in her chair by her fire and held still while she closed the wound with quick, even stitches, and the only sound in the cottage was the rain on the roof and the small snap of the fire, and occasionally the soft tread of the old wolf-hound that lived beside the hearth, who came to investigate me once and then retired to his blanket with an air of polite disinterest. When she was done, she tied the linen off and sat back on her heels and looked at her work. "You can stay until the storm passes," she said. "There's a pallet in the storeroom. It's not soft." "I am grateful," I said. "What do I owe you?" She looked at me for a moment. "Nothing tonight," she said. "Sleep first. We'll see about the rest in the morning." She turned back to her fire, and I understood I had been dismissed. My wolf inside me did something I had not felt him do in 6 years. He did not howl or surge or lift his head with urgency. He simply settled, the way an old dog settles when it finally finds the spot it was looking for, lowering itself down with a long exhale, arranging its bones with the particular care of something that intends to stay. I sat very still and felt him settle, and I did not know what to make of it. I slept on the pallet in her storeroom, which was indeed not soft, surrounded by the smell of dried rosemary and something sweeter I could not name. In the morning, I woke to the sound of rain still on the roof, lighter now, thinning, and the smell of something warm coming from the other room. When I came out, she was at the fire with a pot, and she did not turn around. "Sit," she said. I sat. She brought me a bowl of something thick and herbed and set it in front of me without ceremony, and then she sat across the table with her own bowl and ate in the pleasant silence of a person who genuinely preferred it. The wolfhound came and put his heavy head on my knee, and I scratched his ears without thinking, and she watched that, not with suspicion, just with a brief flicker of attention that I catalogued and then set aside. Outside, through the window, the rain was silver and soft. The pine trees moved slowly. The herbs under the eaves dripped. "You've been writing a long time," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "Looking for something." I looked at her. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her bowl, turning her spoon in the broth with the unhurried attention she gave everything. "What makes you say that?" I said. "The way you looked at the cottage when I opened the door," she said. "Like you recognized it and were also surprised to recognize it. People who are simply traveling look at a strange house like a house. People who have been searching for a long time look at things like they might be the thing they're searching for." I said nothing. After a moment she looked up, and there was nothing probing in her expression. She was simply telling me what she had observed, the way she had told me the wound was deep. As a practical fact, without judgment. "You don't have to tell me what you're looking for," she said. "People who want to talk about it talk, people who don't. Both are fine." She went back to her bowl. I thought, sitting in her kitchen in the second morning of the storm, that I had never in 6 years of writing as Wren the ironworker, not in any village, any pack border inn, any elder's kitchen, met a person who made so little demand on me. Not indifference. Indifference has a coldness to it, a deliberate looking away. This was something else. She was entirely present and entirely undemanding at the same time, which was a combination I had not previously encountered in anyone. My wolf inside me had not moved from where he settled the night before. He was still there, arranged in that long exhale, present in a way he had not been for years. I stayed a second day. There was good reason, the wound needed watching, and she said so with the same directness she said everything, and the storm had not fully lifted, and my horse was content in her stable. But I knew, sitting by her fire that second evening while she worked at her table with dried roots and a small mortar, that the reasons were not the reason. I watched her work. She had a habit, I noticed, of turning things over in her hands before she used them, roots, seeds, pieces of bark, examining them from all sides, holding them up to the firelight, and then sometimes setting them aside in favor of something else. Not indecision, a particular kind of care. She was looking at each thing's full nature before she committed to it. "You do that with everything," I said. She looked up, her hands still in the mortar. "Do what?" "Turn it over, read it from every angle." She considered this. "My mother taught me," she said. "She said that things look different from the other direction. Sometimes the property you need is on the back, not the front. Sometimes a route that looks one way forward looks entirely different when you turn it around." She paused, grinding. She called it reading backward. She said most people only read forward and miss half of what's there. I said nothing. Something moved in my chest that was not quite my wolf and not quite my own heartbeat, something that was both pressed together. She set down the mortar and looked at me with that calm, unhurried attention. "What is it?" she said. "Nothing," I said, "an old thought." She accepted this and turned back to her work. After a moment she reached across the table for a tool, a small bone-handled knife she used for splitting roots, and her hand brushed the edge of my sword, which I had leaned against the table when I sat. The sword slid 2 inches, and I caught the hilt, and for a moment we were both looking at it. The old blade, dark iron, plain, with the pommel that my grandfather had always said was the plainest pommel in Varenhold. No jewels, no decoration, only a single word carved into the flat face of the iron in letters so worn by years that they were nearly invisible. She leaned forward slightly, not touching, just looking. "There's something carved there," she said. "Yes," I said. "May I look?" I held the pommel toward her. She took the sword by the blade, correctly the way someone holds a sword when they are not threatening its owner with it, and tilted the pommel to the fire's light. Her lips moved slightly, sounding out the letters. "Delaric," she said softly. "Is that a name?" "Almost," I said very quietly. She looked at me over the blade. Something moved in her expression, not recognition, not yet, but the early flicker of it, the look of a person who has heard a chord they cannot quite place but know they have heard before. "Almost," she repeated, as though testing the word. She handed the sword back and said nothing more. But I sat in her fire's warmth that night and understood something that I had not understood until this moment, though perhaps I should have, that I was not going to leave in the morning, and not because of the wound and not because of the storm. Because my wolf had not moved from where he had settled, and I had not felt him still and present like this since before my grandfather died. And I was 38 years old, and had ridden every border road in 6 kingdoms in 6 years, looking for a woman I could not describe. And I was sitting in a cottage on the Ashenmoor road with rain on the roof, and a woman across the table who turned things over to read what was on the other side. And something in the arithmetic of it was trying to tell me something I was almost afraid to hear. On the third morning, I woke before she did. I lay on the pallet in the storeroom and listened to the cottage, the slow drip from the eaves, the wolf-hound shifting in his sleep by the hearth, the deep quiet of a house that has held a person long enough to carry their shape in the air. The storm had passed in the night. Through the storeroom's small, high window, I could see the dark blue of the hour before dawn, clear sky, the last stars. I should have risen and saddled my horse and been on the road before she woke. That was what 6 years of riding as Wren the ironworker had taught me. Arrive, observe, move on. Never let the searching become staying. Never give a false name to someone who deserved a true one for more than 2 days. I lay on the pallet and did not rise. I heard her move in the kitchen, the soft sound of her feet, the small clink of the fire being rebuilt, the particular way the kettle sounds when it is lifted and filled. Then silence for a while. Then her voice low, talking to the wolf-hound as she always did in the morning, the brief affectionate murmur of it, not words I could make out, but a tone I knew, which was the tone of someone speaking to a creature they loved without reservation. Then another sound. A scraping, close, just outside the storeroom door. I rose and opened the door. My wolf was in the cottage. Not my wolf in the way I mean when I say my wolf was inside my chest, though he was there too, and he was more awake now than I had ever felt him. My actual wolf. The great gray that traveled always beside my horse in the border roads, that slept outside whatever door I sheltered behind, that had followed me for 11 years and never come inside a strange house without my invitation. My wolf was inside the cottage, and he had my saddlebag by the strap. He was dragging it across the floor toward her. She was standing at the kitchen table with the kettle in her hands, watching him. She was not frightened. She was watching him the way she watched everything, with that unhurried attention, and the wolf-hound beside the hearth had stood up and was watching too, his old tail moving in a slow, uncertain wag. The wolf dragged the saddlebag to the edge of the table and dropped the strap. The bag fell open. From inside it, because the buckle was loose, because I had been riding 6 years and had buckled and unbuckled it 10,000 times, and the catch was worn from inside it, the iron disc rolled. It rolled across the floor in a smooth, clean arc, the way a coin rolls on a flat surface, certain of its direction, and it traveled 4 feet and stopped directly at her feet. She looked down at it. She looked at me, standing in the storeroom doorway. She looked down at it again. Then she set the kettle on the table and bent and picked it up. I know what happened because I felt it before I saw it. A heat in my left wrist, sudden and deep, not painful but unmistakable, the way heat feels when it is not from outside but from inside. A burning behind the skin, clean and fierce, and then gold. The bond mark on my wrist, which had been the colorless, unformed, faint impression that every unbonded alpha carries. The ghost of a thing not yet real blazed gold in the firelight. Gold, not silver gray, gold. I looked at my wrist, and the world narrowed to the size of that mark. She made a sound, a soft, startled exhale, and I looked at her, and she was holding the iron disc in both hands, and the disc was glowing. Not with fire reflection, from within. A steady gold light, the color of old candles, the color of autumn wheat, the color of my wrist, rising from the iron like breath rises in cold air, warm and certain. And her wrist, her left wrist, bared between her sleeve and her hand, the skin that had been unmarked, the bond mark blazed gold. She stared at it. She stared at her wrist, and then at the disc, and then at me, and her expression was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen on a human face. Not fear, not bewilderment, but the expression of someone who has just heard the word they have been trying to remember, the note they have been trying to recall, and recognized it completely, and is simply taking a moment to absorb the fact of it. She looked at my wrist. Then she looked at my face. "Aldrich," she said. Not Wren, not the name I had given her. The name I had not spoken since I crossed the Varenhold border 6 days ago, the name I had kept folded away under 3 days of false identity, the name I had not given anyone on this road. She said it in the quiet, certain voice she used for everything, and she said it correctly, and she was looking at me as though she had known it the moment she opened the door and was only now seeing the use in saying it aloud. I could not speak. "The thing carved in the pommel," she said. I kept turning it over in my mind last night, like my mother taught me. D-Lyric read forward, read backwards, Sirelid. No, that isn't it. But if you read the carving as it was first cast and then worn down, remove a letter, shift the weight of it. She paused. She had been working it out alone in the dark. I understood this. Aldrich, she said again, the king of Varenhold, you've been riding 6 years looking for something. She held up the glowing disc. Was it this, she said, and then quieter, was it me? My wolf rose to his feet inside my chest. Not surging, not howling, simply rose, unhurried, the way he had settled 3 days ago, but in the opposite direction, the way a thing that has waited a very long time rises when the waiting is finished. He stretched. He breathed. He looked at her through my eyes with the calm, complete recognition of an animal that has found what it was sent to find. I crossed the kitchen. I did not take her hand. I did not close the distance between us in any way that would have decided anything for her. I stopped 2 feet from where she stood, and I looked at her face in the gold light of the disc she was still holding, and the gold mark burning on her wrist, and the gold mark burning on mine, and the wolf hound watching from the hearth, and my great gray wolf sitting by the table with his tail moving in a slow, deliberate wag. And I understood that I was about to say the most important words I had ever said in 38 years of living, and 11 years of ruling, and 6 years of riding roads under a false name, and that they needed to be said correctly. I went to one knee. Not in the way a subject kneels, not that formal, presented genuflection. I went to one knee in her kitchen, in the mud I had tracked in from the step, in front of a woman holding a glowing iron disc with a gold mark blazing on her wrist, and I told her the truth. My grandfather gave me the disc when he was dying, I said. He told me it would find what it was for. He told me the records called the woman it would find the Varath line, a bloodline so old the gold of it had not been seen in 400 years. I did not know your name or your face or where you were. I only knew you existed or had existed or might have existed. Every archivist I spoke to said the line was likely dead. I rode the border territories for 6 years because likely was not the same as certainly. She was very still. The disc in her hand still glowed. The gold on my wrist, I said. I have never seen it before, not on anyone. Every bond mark I have ever seen was silver gray. What is on my wrist now, I have never seen this before, but my grandfather's records described it, the completed mark, only between an alpha king and the one his line's bond was made for. I paused. The seal knows your blood, and apparently so does my wolf. My great gray wolf, as if on cue, lowered his head and rested his chin on the floor between his paws in a gesture of profound contentment. I am not asking you to come to Varenhold, I said. I am not telling you what the bond means for you or what it requires of you, because it requires only what you choose to give it. I rode 6 years as a traveling ironworker and not as a king precisely because I did not want to find you by commanding you. I looked up at her. I am asking you to choose. Whatever you choose, I will accept it. If you tell me to take the disc and go, I will go, and I will carry this. I lifted my left wrist, the gold blazing on it, for the rest of my life, and call it enough because it means you exist and you are well and the search was not foolish. She looked at me for a long moment. The fire popped, the wolfhound sighed, the disc in her hands hummed its quiet gold. Somewhere outside, a bird began to speak into the new morning, the first bird, tentative, into the clear air after the storm. My mother died 4 years ago, she said. She told me the last winter she was well that she came from a line of women who carried something in the blood. She said it as though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She said the line was almost certainly the last of its kind, and that whatever it had been made for had probably already passed, and that I should not spend my life waiting for something that might never come. She paused. She was practical. She didn't mean it unkindly. She just thought I should know so that I wouldn't waste time. She was wrong, I said. She was wrong, Myra agreed gently without any triumph in it. She looked at the disc in her hands, and then she set it on the kitchen table, carefully, as though it were a living thing she was putting down to rest. Then she looked at me, still on one knee in her kitchen. I need you to stand up, she said. Kings shouldn't kneel in mud. I will kneel in mud until you've answered me, I said. Something moved across her face, not a smile exactly, but the early architecture of one, the adjustment of expression that happens before the feeling has quite arrived. I have a wolfhound, she said. He's old, he doesn't travel well in cold weather. I will send a warm-covered cart for him, I said. He will ride like a lord. My herb garden, she said. I've been building it for 8 years. I will have your herb garden dug up and every root replanted in Varenhold's south courtyard, I said, which faces east and gets more light than this window. Your plants will be better for it. She looked at me. The almost smile had arrived. You've been kneeling in my kitchen for some time now, she said. I am aware, I said. I am a patient man. 6 years on the border roads have made me very patient. She reached out, not quickly, not with urgency, in the particular unhurried way she did everything, and she took my left hand in both of hers and turned it over, the way she turned over her roots and her seeds and everything she picked up, reading it from all its angles. She looked at the gold mark on my wrist in the firelight. She turned her own left wrist up beside it. Gold on gold. Yes, she said. It was a small word. She said it in the same tone she used for everything, simply without performance, as a practical fact. But it was the word I had been riding toward for 6 years, and it landed in my chest with the weight of everything that had preceded it. Every road and every storm and every false name and every elder who had told me gently that the bloodline was likely dead. And I felt my wolf draw one long breath and release it. I rose to my feet. Outside, without any prompting I had given, I had not howled, had not sent the signal through the pack bond, had not done anything at all. My great gray wolf threw his head back and howled. The sound went out across the Ashenmore Valley, over the wet pines, over the cleared sky, into the morning. It was a clean sound, full-throated and certain, the sound of an animal announcing something that should have been announced a long time ago. A breath, 2 breaths, and then from across the valley, from 30 miles north where the stone towers of Varenhold stood in the morning light, from the pack that had waited 6 years for their king to finish searching, the answer came. Low at first, then building, then the whole valley filled with it. The Varenhold wolves, all of them, raising the answer call, the recognition, the sound that a pack makes when its alpha comes home with his mate. She was still holding my hand. She looked out the window at the pines, listening. Your pack, she said. Our pack, I said. She was quiet for a moment. She turned my hand over once more in hers, her habit, reading it from every angle, and then she looked up at me with the calm, unhurried attention that was entirely and specifically hers, and she said, I want to walk there, not ride. I want to see the road. I thought of 30 miles of pine forest and river valley in the clear morning after the storm, the light through wet branches, the ground soft underfoot. We'll walk, I said. She smiled, then, fully at last, the expression that had been arriving in stages finally completing itself, and it was the warmest thing I had ever seen in a human face. She turned and picked up the iron disc from the table and held it out to me. I took it and put it in my pocket, and then I opened the cottage door. My wolf was already on the step, tail moving, looking back at us with the expectant patience of an animal who has already decided the direction. We walked. I want to tell you what it was like, because I have thought about it many times since. The Ashenmore Road in the morning after a storm is the most particular kind of quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a recovering world, the drip from every needle, the reset of birdsong, the smell of the earth which has been washed clean and is still deciding what to do next. She walked beside me with her hands in her pockets and her face open to the air, and she asked me questions, not urgent ones, not the questions I expected about councils and territories and what it meant to be a king's mate, but the questions she was actually curious about. What the eastern iron roads looked like. Whether I had seen the salt flats at the Varenhold border, the ones that turned pink at certain hours. Whether I had found anything in 6 years of writing under a false name that surprised me. I told her about the salt flats. I told her about the elder in the 3rd year who had wept when I told him I was looking for the Veyrath line, not from sorrow but from the relief of it, because his grandmother had spoken of the gold mark her whole long life, and no one had believed her. I told her about the storm in the 4th year that had kept me in a border inn for 9 days, and how I had spent 8 of those 9 days sorting the innkeeper's account books, because they were catastrophically disordered, and it had seemed a useful thing to do. She laughed at that, not a polite laugh, the genuine, brief, startled laugh of someone who did not expect to find that funny and found it very funny indeed. A king sorting accounts in an inn, she said. Ren the ironworker, I said. He's a man of many practical skills. She shook her head, still smiling. You must have been a very strange traveling ironworker. I was told twice that I held myself oddly for a tradesman, I said. I believe that is the most accurate assessment of me I have ever received from anyone who did not know who I was. She walked beside me, and I watched her profile against the morning light and thought that I had not felt anything like ease in a very long time. Not since before my grandfather died, before the disc, before the 6 years of the road. Ease, the particular quality of a person who does not need to be anywhere other than where they are, was not something I had expected to feel on the morning after the bond mark blazed gold, with 30 miles of wet pine forest ahead of me and a woman I had known 3 days. And yet, she had a way of being beside a person that left room for everything, for silence, for questions, for the particular turn of thought that was not quite conversation and not quite solitude. She had been doing this in her cottage from the moment she let me in, making room, not for me specifically, for whatever came through her door. That was simply who she was. A woman whose door was always open and whose fire was always lit, who had built her life in a cottage on a road most people did not travel, and who had perhaps known in some part of herself that she did not examine too closely, that there was a reason she had stayed. I told her this, somewhere in the middle of the second hour of walking, when the road had risen into the low hills and the pines had given way to old oaks whose bare branches held the morning light. Your mother told you the line was likely done, I said, that you shouldn't wait for something that might never come. She did, Mara said. And yet you stayed, I said, on the Ashenmore Road, which most people do not travel. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the oaks. I told myself it was the herb garden, she said. The soil there is particular, the drainage from the old quarry behind the cottage, the way the moss holds water but doesn't waterlog. I told myself I stayed because of that. She paused, and I did. I also stayed because I could not quite bring myself to go farther. Every time I thought about leaving, moving to a larger packed territory, where I might be more useful, where there would be more people, I would get as far as packing a bag and then find a reason to unpack it. She looked at me. I thought I was simply not a person who was good at leaving. You might not be, I said. You also might have been waiting for something to arrive. She looked at me for a long moment. You're very calm about this, she said, for someone who has just found the thing he spent 6 years searching for. I'm a patient man, I said. You said that before. It remains true. She shook her head, but she was smiling again. That particular smile that I was already categorizing as the thing I most wanted to see for as long as I could manage to be in the same room with it. We rested at midday on a flat stone beside a river crossing, the water running clear and fast after the storm. She produced, from a bag she had packed with the same brisk efficiency with which she did everything, a cloth with bread and dried fruit and a small wedge of hard cheese, and she divided it evenly without asking and handed me half. We ate by the river and watched the water, and the wolf-hound, who had followed us from the cottage, moving at his own stately pace, unimpressed by the weight of destiny, sat between us and accepted a crust with great dignity. You said you'd send a cart for him, she said. I will, I said. He's going to be furious about the cart, she said fondly. He thinks he's a wolf, he'll want to walk. Then he'll walk, I said. I'll send the cart for your herb garden. She laughed again. I stored the sound of it. The afternoon was long and the road was easy, and we talked the way people talk when they have more to say than time allows, and have also, somehow, all the time they need. She told me about her mother, a woman who had the same unhurried manner, the same habit of turning things over to read the back of them, who had moved to the Ashenmore cottage after Mara's father died and had grown every herb in the garden herself, and had never, in all her years there, seemed to be waiting. She had seemed to Mara to be purely present, which Mara had thought for a long time was a thing she admired but could not quite achieve. I think she was waiting, Mara said. I think she was waiting for me to be old enough that she could leave without leaving me with nothing, and then she did. She said this without self-pity, in the factual tone that was simply the way she said things, but I heard what was in it. The man you were betrothed to, I said. She looked at me surprised. You mentioned last night, I said, the night of the bonding ceremony that he chose someone else, she said. The night before, I came home and packed my bag and then decided not to leave, which I told myself was courage and was probably something else. She paused. That was 4 years ago, before my mother died. I was angry for a while, and then I was not, and then I was simply here, which is not a bad place to be. No, I said, it is not. She looked at me sideways. You're going to say something about how it was fate, that he left so you could find me. I was not going to say that, I said. It may be true, but it seems presumptuous to say it as though his leaving were simply a convenience arranged for my benefit. He was unkind to you, and that is its own matter. She was quiet for a moment. You're not what I expected, she said. You expected something. I expected, she considered. I suppose I expected a king to feel like a king even when he was pretending not to be, something large and declarative. You were just a man with a wound who told my horse to move over. I did not tell your horse to move over, I said. I asked him. You said, move, please, to my horse in the same tone you'd use for a junior officer, she said. It was very commanding. He was blocking the water bucket, I said. He was, she agreed, and we were both briefly, quietly laughing, which was not something I had done with another person in a long time and which felt, like everything else on this road today, like something that had been waiting for me to catch up to it. The Varenhold Towers came into view in the late afternoon light, when the sun was already behind the hills and the sky had gone the deep, pale blue of autumn dusk. They rose from the river valley ahead, stone and iron, the 4 great towers that my grandfather had built, and his grandfather before him, the banners hanging still in the windless cold. She stopped on the road and looked. It's large, she said. It is, I said. My cottage would fit in one room of it, she said. Several rooms, I said. I won't lie to you. She looked at it for a long moment. The wolfhound sat beside her and also looked, with the air of a creature making a considered assessment. The south courtyard, she said. You said it faces east. It does, I said. The light there in the morning is better than anything on the Ashenmore Road. You can't know that, she said. You've never seen my garden in the morning. I have, I said, from the storeroom window 3 mornings. She turned to look at me. The storeroom window faces west, she said. I'm a patient man, I said. I got up early. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite exasperation, and was entirely, specifically the sound of a person who has discovered that they have been seen clearly and does not entirely mind. She looked at the towers again. All right, she said, and she walked forward. I walked beside her, and my wolf ran ahead, and the wolfhound came behind at his own pace, and the Varenhold gates opened when we were still a quarter-mile out. The gate captain having seen the alpha and his wolf, and, I imagine, having looked at the woman beside him, and at the gold light visible on both our left wrists even at that distance, and understood what he was seeing. My council was assembled in the outer courtyard. My packmaster, who had worried about me for 6 years with the quiet, steadfast loyalty of a man who says nothing but watches everything. My elder council, 3 of them, who had told me in the 2nd year of searching that the Verath bloodline was almost certainly extinct, that I was a king with a kingdom and should not spend myself on a ghost. Old Barath, who had called it in the 3rd year, a king's foolishness, and who stood now in the courtyard with the others and looked at the woman beside me and at the gold on our wrists and said nothing at all, which was, I thought, more eloquent than anything he might have managed. Myra walked into the courtyard and looked at them, and then she looked at me. Do I bow? She said quietly. Not to them, I said. They bow to you. And they did. Old Barath first. He was a man who, whatever his opinions, always recognized when he had been wrong, and he bowed the way a man bows when the proof is complete and unanswerable without performance, simply acknowledging the fact. The others followed. My packmaster bowed last, and when he rose he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in 6 years, plain, uncomplicated relief. She is the Verath line, I said to them. The seal has confirmed it, the bond is complete. Barath looked at the gold on my wrist. He looked at hers. His face moved through several things and arrived at something that was, I thought, as close to humility as his particular character would allow. Then the bloodline did not die, he said. No, I said. It did not. I had not planned the rest of what I said. I had not prepared it, had not, in 6 years of imagining this moment, thought past the moment of arrival, the bond completing, the bringing her home. But I found that I knew what to say, the way I sometimes knew things in the middle of a battle, not because I had prepared for it, but because the moment made it clear. The search was not foolish, I said. It was simply long. Old Barath, who had called it a king's foolishness, met my eyes. He gave a small nod that was not agreement. He would never quite be a man who admitted to being wrong, but was acknowledgement. The closest thing he could offer. It was enough. That evening, Mara was given the Queen's chambers, which she moved through with the same unsurprised practicality with which she moved through everything, touching the heavy curtains and the fireplace and the writing desk with a quiet attention that was not the astonishment of someone overwhelmed, and not the detachment of someone performing adjustment, but something between. A person taking genuine inventory of a new thing, learning its nature before committing to it. My packmaster's mate, Sira, who was the warmest person in Varenhold and who had spent 6 years privately despairing that I would ever finish searching, brought Mara a tray of food and sat with her for an hour while I met with my council. And when I found them afterward, they were already in the particular mode of two women who have found each other's company agreeable and are making short work of becoming friends. This is something women do much faster than men and much more effectively, and I have always considered it one of the species' genuine advantages. My counsel gave me 45 minutes. There were things that could not wait, a border dispute that had been simmering for 3 weeks, a supply question from the eastern holds, and I dealt with them with the particular focused efficiency of a man who is attending to the necessary in order to arrive at the important. Then I thanked them and left. She was in the south courtyard. I had not told her where it was. She had found it on her own. The packmaster's mate had apparently given her a brief geography of the keep, and she was standing in the center of it in the last of the day's light, her face turned up toward the stone walls and the sky above them, the remaining blue of the evening deepening toward dark. "The light would be good here in the morning," she said without turning around. "I told you," I said. "You told me. I wanted to see for myself." I stood in the courtyard doorway and looked at her in the last of the evening light and thought of the road we had walked that day. 30 miles of wet pine and river crossing an oak branch and open sky, and of the 3 days before it in her cottage, the fire and the herb smell and the wolf watching from the threshold, and of the 6 years before that, every road and every false name and every careful question, all of it describing a line that had always been pointing here, to this courtyard, to this woman standing in it with her face tipped toward the sky. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask," I said. "What did it feel like?" She turned then to look at me. 6 years of searching. What did it feel like inside? I thought about the question seriously, because she asked serious questions and deserved serious answers. "It felt like reading something backward," I said. "Like there was a word I could almost see, almost make out the shape of, but every time I turned it forward I couldn't quite read it. And I kept thinking that if I could only find the right angle, the right direction, I would be able to see it." I paused. "And then I sat in your kitchen and you told me about your mother teaching you to read things backward, and I thought, there it is. That is the direction." She was quiet for a moment, looking at me. "And now," she said, "can you read it?" I crossed the courtyard to where she stood. "Yes," I said. And I held out my left wrist, the gold mark steady in the evening light. She took my hand in both of hers and turned it over, as she always did, reading it from every angle, the back and the front of it. And then she held her own wrist beside mine, and the gold of both marks met in the air between us like 2 notes of the same chord. She kept her eyes on the marks for a long moment. Then she looked up. "I should write a letter to my mother," she said. "She was wrong about the line being done. She would want to know." I looked at her, at the particular composure of her, the warmth and the practicality and the absolute willingness to be exactly where she was without wishing it were otherwise. "She would have liked you," Mara said. "She respected patience." "Then we would have gotten along," I said. She smiled, that full, arrived smile, the one that had been building in stages since the kitchen floor and had finally reached its completed form, and she kept her hand in mine and looked at the courtyard, the stone walls, the last blue of the sky. We stood there for a while, in the quiet of Varenhold after its wolves had finished answering, the deep, ordinary quiet of a kingdom going about its evening, fires being lit in towers, the smell of supper, the distant bark of a dog, and I felt, for the first time in 11 years of being king and 6 of riding under a false name, that I was entirely where I was supposed to be. Some weeks later in the evenings, when the council work was done and the supper things were put away and the wolf-hound had been settled in his place by the fire, the covered cart had been sent. He had, as she predicted, been furious. He had walked the first 10 miles and then, with great dignity, accepted the cart. I would sit in the south courtyard with her, where the herb garden had been replanted and was already, according to her, doing better than it had on the Ashenmore Road. She had a habit in the evenings of checking the plants before it was fully dark. She moved through them with a small lamp, touching leaves, leaning down to smell the soil, talking to the slower-growing ones the way she talked to the wolfhound. The brief, fond murmur of someone attending to things she loved. I watched her do this and thought, as I often thought, that she was the most unhurried person I had ever met, and that this quality, which had seemed from the outside like a kind of patience, was in fact something closer to presence. She was simply here, in the way that very few people manage to simply be anywhere. One evening she came back to where I sat and stood beside me and looked up at the sky, stars out, clear, the kind of cold autumn night that sharpens everything, and she said without preamble, "I want you to tell me about the disc. The whole history of it, your grandfather and the records and every person you spoke to in 6 years." "That's a long story," I said. "We have time," she said. And so I told her. I told her about the disc and my grandfather's last hours and the single page in his handwriting and the archivist who had wept. I told her about the elder in the 3rd year and the innkeeper's account books and the storm that kept me 9 days in the border inn. I told her about the moment in the 5th year when I had very nearly stopped, had been on the road a month and covered 400 miles of border territory and found nothing, and had sat on my horse in a river ford at dusk and thought, perhaps Barath is right, perhaps it is foolishness. Perhaps the line ended, and the disc is simply old iron, and my grandfather was a man who believed in things that did not exist, and I am making the same mistake. "What made you keep going?" she said. "I thought about it." "My wolf," I said. He was still inside me. He had not given up. He was quieter than I had ever known him and grayer and more still, but he had not stopped. And I thought, if he is still waiting, I will wait. She considered this. "Good wolf," she said. "He is," I said. She was quiet for a moment, and then she traced the gold mark on my wrist with one finger, the way she touched the herbs she was checking, with a botanist's attention, and looked at it in the starlight. "Read forward," she murmured, very low, as though she were talking to herself, the habit of turning things over, looking at the other side. "Read backward, either way." She looked up at me. "Either way," she said, "it says the same thing." I looked at her in the cold autumn light of the Varenhold south courtyard, with her herb garden behind her and the wolf-hound asleep by the fire somewhere inside, and my great gray wolf on the step, and the gold marks on both our wrists steady in the dark. "Yes," I said, "it does." The stars were very clear. The pack was quiet. The word that I had spent 6 years trying to read from the right direction had always been the same word, from every angle, and it was her name, and I knew it now, and I would know it for the rest of my life.